let's look a bit further in Flanders. Let's look at Bruges. Bruges, since 2020, has an accessibility officer. Her mission is to create an inclusive city where everybody can move freely, autonomously, and in which everybody plays a role. And Bruges has signed the Charter for an Accessible City as well, the charter drawn up by Inter. The accessibility officer is Els Pieraerts, and the plan that she worked on in the past period is based on 4 pillars: making public areas accessible, so buildings, communication, information, service provision, and free time, making all of that accessible. So, Ms. Els Pieraerts, you have the floor.
Dank u wel.
Thank you. I would say good morning, but we're almost at midday, so it's a difficult task to speak right before lunch because you are all hungry. Okay. So, my name is Els. I am Accessibility Officer at the city of Bruges, and I am very happy to welcome you in our beautiful city. Well, we worked on a very integral accessibility policy, accessibility plan, and I have the pleasure of looking into it together with you today. In the policy program of 2019 in Bruges, we expressed the mission to really focus on accessibility in Bruges much more than was done in the past. Well, before we already worked on accessibility, of course. Bruges is a city that that has been working on accessibility for quite some time, but we want to enhance that focus. And I, as an accessibility officer, my task is to unite all the people that work on this, all the parties that work on this. At the end of 2020, we hired an accessibility officer, and I think we were the second city in Flanders to do that. The first city was Ghent, who has already a long history of working on accessibility as well, of course. And at the end of 2020 as well, we signed the Charter of Inter, the Charter towards an Accessible City. And here you see a picture. Yes, they are still wearing face masks. Those were the times. And in that charter, we included a couple of commitments. The most important one was that there would be an accessibility plan, that we would have a structural policy as of day one. And of course, in close collaboration with stakeholders, with experts by experience, with partners. And under the guidance of Inter, we also started up this process based on the reference framework towards an accessible city. I'm not going to explain that again because we heard about that just a minute ago in Jos's presentation. We have gone through a whole process together with all the city boards, also the advisory boards for people with disabilities and so on. We also had an online survey. Yes, remember, we had Corona then, so it wasn't that easy to gather everybody. The result was a very broad integral accessibility plan, and that is of course the topic for my presentation today. I want to look at that plan together with you. I want to look at the links with heritage as well. Important to note is that the accessibility plan, or the process that we went through, was a very structural, long-term process. Here on the slide you see a picture of a bridge that is built across a river, and it says maybe we should build a boat instead. So that means you need to think before you act. You need to think where you want to go to. So we really took our time. The accessibility plan needed to be a framework that was future-proof, and Just like with the province, we wanted to have a plan with specific objectives and multi-annual goals. Let's look at the vision, because it's a long-term plan, of course. So we think about the future. We think about where we want to go. I'm not going to discuss everything. Just a couple of important principles that you will be familiar with. Integral accessibility, for example. Residents and visitors should be able to use all facilities, buildings, open spaces and services independently and equally. Universal design, which was also highlighted by a couple of speakers. On the basis of a couple of principles, we need to make sure that what we make, what we design, that is accessible to all. We need to leave room for changes as well. And then the last important thing is the accessibility chain. This is also very important in city management. The connection between the different projects is very important. Those are all interlinked. And this afternoon we will talk about mobility. Mobility has a very linking function, of course, a very connecting function. Let's look at the plan now. The plan consists of 4 thematic areas. I'm not going to talk about the 4 fundamentals that much, but they are very important for that long-term vision. It's important that they are anchored into policy accessibility. That means that it's the task of an alderman and that it's included in the internal processes. If we talk about public domains, public space, then that is included in the processes and in the checklists when a project starts. Another pillar is the collaboration. We focus very much on collaboration with experts by experience, with partners, with other players. For example, at the end of last year, we had the soundboard accessibility team, and their role is to test specific things. Are we doing a good job? Are there any improvements still needed? And so on. Communication is another fundamental. Communication about accessibility. And the last fundamental, or last pillar that was added quite late in the process is data. We found out that we have not enough data on accessibility, not just in Bruges, but in the whole of Flanders, and actually in the whole of Europe. And let's look at the content now. The construction sites. I'm going to go through the 4 construction sites very briefly, and I'm going to highlight the links to heritage. The plan contains a lot, of course, but I'm going to pick out a couple of points. The first construction site, figuratively speaking, of course, is the access to public space. Public space, public domain, and so on, the access to those areas, and also mobility. We will look at the station surroundings this afternoon, so very specific, but one of the things that we had in this point is that we wanted to include universal design in start notes, in project notes. So universal design is actually a guiding principle that needs to be included in new big projects. Universal design needs to be one of the criteria in the big scale projects. Another example of accessibility or access to public space is the policy or the design of the inner city. So the inner city of Bruges is UNESCO World Heritage. That has already been mentioned, and that presents many design challenges, of course. What really attracts me in the whole concept of accessibility and universal design is creativity. Creative solutions, and we said it before. If you work on accessibility and heritage, it's sometimes difficult, often difficult, but I see it as a creative challenge. So that sounds much more positive, a creative challenge. And the example that you see here is an example of the Ridderstraat. So it's a typical street in the inner city of Bruges with a lot of historic steps and in front of a building next to the facade. And these steps actually take up the whole pathway, the footpath. So this is when the creative process starts. A redesign starts by bringing together the different parties, whereby we have the designers present, also people from the heritage institutions, so the different parties, whereby we think about how we are going to tackle this project. There are different demands, different requirements as well. A requirement for this street was to keep the parking spaces. This means that when you do a reconstruction, you cannot reconstruct everything from the facade until the other side of the street. As to accessibility, we chose to keep the ramp on the sidewalk. That means that there is a threshold between the sidewalk and the road. But the steps were creatively solved. The creative solution was found for these steps. We have a lower threshold to bypass the steep incline, and in this way ensuring a continuous route. So this is actually a perfect example of how a project goes. So from the beginning onwards, we see it as a requirement, and we think about it in a creative way with all the parties.
Additionally, some other items regarding accessibility are asked in the design plans. This guarantees that it is done in a good way. Another topic in public spaces is squares and terraces. Here you can see an example. This is actually right in front of the provincial Hof that we were talking about. Here you can see there is a line between mosaic stones on the ground, and here you can see it's flat. Well, here there is a point of self-refraction, and it's the following. In fact, we could have made it a bit larger, so it would have become a comfort line. So what else do we have in the accessibility plan? We are actually also, changing the terraces. Can we follow a logical line? For example, at the marketplace of Bruges, we are actually putting the terraces behind a line with the help of flowers that you can see here. Making good order in your terrace zones is also very important regarding public spaces. Then another topic that's part of the accessibility plan is everything that has to do with parks and playgrounds. So here we, we think communication is very important. Other colleagues talked about it as well. It's very important that as a visitor, you can know what you can get there. Can I go there? Is there something for me, etc. In new projects, we're also working regarding accessible linking. I know Herita talked about this as well. Even if not everything is accessible, it's important that you can have a comparable feeling when you're at the site. Then I want to talk about mobility. We are one of the communities that signed the master plan of accessible bus stops, and we are working, for example, in the city center to make bus stops more accessible. We work together with our service of heritage, And we had a very interesting conversation with them, with this service. Here you can see, for example, in white, the side of the bus. Well, it has to be in a contrasting color, and also the materialization of your bus stop needs to be different. You can see that the materialization has been chosen to be in natural stone, so that the bus stop is part of the whole area. This is just one example that I'm giving you. I know we will talk more about mobility this afternoon. Well, accessibility of buildings, this is a topic that is very important when we talk about heritage and accessibility. I will give you a few examples regarding, yes, regarding policy, well, from our own patrimonium, we have some ambition. We have a level of ambition. We are working on several issues here. We are going further than what is actually legally outlined for us. So we are working on large buildings as well. We don't want to have the buildings only integrally accessible, but also the feeling the visitors have is important for us. In this, we also have a chapter around accessible sanitary provisions, and we're very happy to see what happened at the provincial domain, and this is very important for the visitors of our city as well. A project I'm showing you here as well is making the sanitary provisions of Magdalena Kerke in Bruges accessible, and this has, well, for this some effort was needed. The conclusion was that, well, we came to an accessible path that leads to the sanitary provisions of the church. The result is there. We are, well, for us, it's almost a small museum. It's really nice to go to the toilet there and to visit it. Look at this. Well, let's go to another topic. Well, when we talk about buildings, of course, we also talk about businesses and restaurants and cafes. Of course, when we are in the center of a city, we do know that it can be made better. We know that, of course, there is some regulation in this regard. There will be some alterations in this legislation, in this as well. So when, of course, new buildings are built or alterations are made, some standards have to be followed in this, but for some reasons it's not always possible to do this, or alterations are not planned. And in this regard, together with the city of Bruges, we worked on a project with a local NGO, and with this we are actually working with this. As you can see on the picture, this is not an ideal situation. We hope that it is solved structurally within the building, within the business owners. But, well, this is better than nothing. We're trying to give an example here. I want to talk about two issues. Well, we are working on two sites at this moment. Well, the accessibility to information and communication. You can say this is not part of accessible cultural heritage, but no, it is. I also want to talk about accessible language, and well, in this also diversity is important. Let me show you this. Here you can see an example of a leaflet regarding the Monuments Weekend, and here we use symbols of how can I get here in this building. At this moment, we are no longer working with icons, but we are working with a description of accessibility on a page, because just an icon, it doesn't say that much. It's more interesting to give accessibility information so that the visitor can decide for themselves if it is doable for them or not. Well, lastly, I want to talk about the accessibility to spare time and services. Everything regarding tourism is also under this level. My colleague also talked about this. We worked with Visit Bruges on this as well, with an accessibility brochure. And for the first time, it's also actually departing from, how a person feels when they visit a city. What are the most important sites to visit in Bruges? So you will not find a list with all accessible restaurants, but you can start with a walk from the city center, and from there onwards you will find the important sites. Also, culture is part of this, spare time and culture. Well, my colleagues gave some examples. I want to give you the example of the Grutus Museum. This is a building with lots of swirling stairs, and well, it was not possible to put an elevator here, but here they are working with tactile elements and with audio guides. Events, we talked about this as well. Making events accessible is also important within the city center. This is also important. We are working with audio description in this. And we are working with sign language videos, but also tactile elements. The Triennale is at the moment running in our city. This is a cultural high, and lots of users have worked on this, and they worked to make the art elements, the art objects, to translate it into tactile elements. So here we talked about our plan. I tried to give you the examples that have more to do with cultural heritage. If you want to know more about it, you can find the entire accessibility plan and policy online. I hope you will have a nice lunch. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Els Pieraerts, the accessibility officer of the city of Bruges. It's nice to hear that there is a soundboard in Bruges. Accessibility has a lot to do with creativity and thinking creatively. Now